welcome along to another episode of Sweet Tea and Coffee.
That was perfect, by the way.
What?
That was good.
Volume?
Yeah.
Do I need to do that again?
Yeah, let's do it one more time.
Welcome along to another episode of Sweet Tea and Coffee.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
We're gonna keep all this. We're gonna keep all this on here.
Okay. So you're just making me do this over and over so that people can mock me.
How many times can I get you to do the welcome?
Well, so Blake always tells me that right before an episode, I get real excited. And the introduction, he always has his hand on the volume button because in the introduction, I always blast in.
All the
he's got to adjust
all the
volume.
pre-production conversations at a normal level, and all of a sudden you're like yelling right on the very first part. So I
was really trying to have a calm and collected voice for welcome along. So, friends, all that banter, sorry about that. We are glad that you're listening. We did have a friend of the pod to talk about.
A returning friend of the pod.
Yeah, so this is epic, okay? This is we're viral now, and whatever that means. And now we've got returning friends of the pod.
Right.
And we said we were going to try to get stickers for friends of the pod.
We haven't done that yet.
We haven't done that yet, but what happens if they're double friends of the pod?
I don't know.
Get like 2 stickers?
2 stickers, 2 stars.
Wow. Tell us what.
We got an email from our friend Blake Waller, and he was just talking.
Hey, Blake.
He was just talking about how he was impacted by Miss Wilma's episode. How much of that was an encouragement to him, and I agree. It was a huge encouragement for me. I really loved that episode.
That was a good episode. Was there any specific part that he mentioned, or just in general, or
just talking about the walking in friendship with the Lord over the course of a lifetime?
Yeah,
in 64 years of marriage.
64 years of marriage, wasn't that cool? Yeah, really awesome. Man, afterwards. It always happens where we hit record, we turn off the recording, and then we hear some great stories of Wilma and Dennis and airplane hangars and fun things like that.
Wilma was a little worried about getting in trouble from Dennis. I hadn't heard from him if he was upset, but
I think he's good.
I think he's good.
I think he's good. Well, today is going to be a really exciting day. We may go a little long today. We may break this up into a few different episodes. Anything could happen on Sweet Tea and Coffee. But we've got Kara Cooper here. And if that name sounds familiar, well, that's because we've had Randall Cooper, Kara's husband, on before. He was one of the early episodes.
Yeah, one of the top 10 most listened to episodes on this
podcast.
But I have a feeling we may rival that today.
That there's going to be a rivalry that's developed, and I think Kara's going to overtake him. That's my bet. I think this will be a big one. So
safe to say,
Randall, she's coming for you. Watch out. Hey, stick around. This is going to be fun. Okay, so as I said, we have got Kara Cooper in the house with us today. Thanks for coming by. And we kind of front-loaded the episode by saying that Randall was one of the most listened to podcasts that we've got. And I deemed Randall the most interesting man in the world in that podcast. So he's like done everything and knows everything about everything, and he's got a podcast record. So no pressure, Kara, no pressure. But we think you're going to challenge him. That's our initial feelings. How do you feel about that? Do you think you want to overtake him and have bragging rights in the house, or what are your feelings on that?
I mean, either way, it's all in the same house, right? I'm good
She's
with
too
it.
nice.
Oh,
too nice.
She's too nice. And but a little subtle there. The Cooper house dominance is what I hear. Like, she's like, I don't care if it's him or me. The point is both trophies are going to be in our room.
Yeah. I mean, there's no point in fighting the Cooper name, right? I'll just take it where it lands. So
I love that. Well, seriously, thanks for being here with us. This is interesting. This is the first time that we have interviewed not together.
Yeah. We felt like we needed to break them up.
Yeah, that's right. So this will be interesting. So we obviously have in Randall's episode some of y'all's story, your journey all over the place that wound you back here in Nacogdoches. But tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what was life like as a kid, and how did you end up making your way to Nacogdoches?
Sure. Well, I grew up in the big town of Hudson, right outside of Lufkin.
That's right.
And grew up there, and I met Randall when I was 9. But anyway, we went to school together and moved off for college for a little bit, and then he was doing the Navy while I was doing college, and then we got married, and we moved to Beaumont so he could do college for a little while. So, once we left Beaumont and went to Michigan to do school for him, he really wanted to come back to East Texas. And I really wanted to go back to Southeast Texas because that's where our home and where we had kind of built a life. But he was persistent that we wanted to be in East Texas. So
interesting.
Yeah. So when we lived in Beaumont, we lived there 5 years and we left from 4 hurricanes. But anyway, I loved a lot of the people there and we had put down roots. But as a compromise in East Texas, we decided to try Nacogdoches. And so that's where we tried. And once we came to Fredonia Hill, we were like, oh yeah, this is going to be home. So that's how we ended up here. And he was definitely right. This was the right fit for us. So
wow.
Yeah.
So that is interesting. How did the conversation about Fredonia Hill come up? I mean, you're new to Nacogdoches. Your family at that time still, I assume, lived around here.
Yes, we have both of us have a lot of family around here, which is such a blessing. Initially he was really wanting us to move back to Lufkin, like more to where had originally been home.
Yeah.
And I love Lufkin, but I wasn't sure I wanted to go right back to Lufkin. And so he would say, not move back to East Texas. He'd say, like, when we move back to Lufkin. And so finally one day I was like, hey, what if we tried Nacogdoches? And he was like, yeah, we could totally do that. And so that's what we did. We came back and we hadn't been in Nacogdoches very long. And then once we visited here, we were both so hungry for community after living off that I think the first week we were here, the Knowles asked us out for lunch like right then. And so, it just felt like home. Yeah.
What year would that have been when you guys first started coming?
Yes. January 2011.
Oh,
January 2010. Sorry. Yeah, January 2010.
Okay.
So,
wow, yeah. So you guys were pretty new. We came in 2011. Y'all were still
pretty new.
It's funny when you move somewhere, you assume everybody's been there forever.
Yeah.
And you don't realize that there's actually a lot of people that are also new. And so, okay, so you come and what's it like? Just as a aside, what's it like to be married to a guy that can just do it all? He's the mechanic. He's a musician. He can build instruments. He can grow a fantastic beard. I mean, just like, what's it like living with that guy?
Yeah, well, I think he's a great guy. I mean, right? Like, he's the one that, it's such a blessing. And he definitely is my best friend. So,
That's awesome.
It's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. And y'all started dating when you were...
kind of depends on who you ask.
Oh, because we've asked him, this is good. What is your side of that story?
Well, just real quick. So, we started dating our spring senior year. Like, we'd known each other since we were 9. But even though Hudson's small, we were kind of in different circles. And Randall came to know Christ at 16, and there's just a huge change in him. But anyway, we started dating in the spring of our senior year, but he had already signed up to go into the Navy. And I knew I wanted to stay here and go to school to teach. And so I think I'm remembering this right, that he thought we could make it work long distance. And I didn't at the time because we didn't even know where he was going to be stationed.
Yeah. Wow.
But it wasn't going to be close to East Texas.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's amazing how the Lord just kind of gave us some distance and some time. And so I would say we started dating, really started dating a year and a half into him being into the Navy. So probably when we were 20. And then we dated 4 of the 5 years that he was in the service. So
and it worked.
Yeah. And it was definitely a God thing because most of our dates were talking on the cell phone. I mean, not the cell phone, on the pay phone because we didn't have cell phones then.
That's right.
The Lord really used that to work on our communication skills and to really grow, I think, our love and respect for each other because we started out, if you want to date someone else, that's totally fine, and it just, the Lord just put us together. So,
wow. That's way cool.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So there's some friends of mine that their dating relationship was somewhat similar. They met kind of at the end of I think at the end of high school, and she was going to go to. Anyway, I asked him this the other day, just about their journey, and they essentially like did the military thing, and she did, and they had to date long distance at like 9 years.
Wow.
At doing the long distance thing and moving around, and it does every time you hear one of those stories, you do hear about how that challenge. Some obviously don't overcome that; it becomes too difficult. But overcoming it really, it does something significant in the area of communication and really solidifies a relationship in a really unique way before you even take that step of getting married. I feel like it's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, it definitely, I mean, I knew when we got married, he was the only person that I wanted to be with, and it wasn't just because, things had just fallen together easily. But yeah, it was definitely because of the Lord, not because of us. I mean, he was just really gracious to grow us during that time. So
now so you grew up, and we're going to get to this. So much of my understanding of your story and becoming connected with you guys has to do with your kiddos.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I drop in for the first time to you and Randall's story. But one of the things that I know about you is that you grew up in a Christian home, and you gave your life to the Lord at a young age, right?
Yes.
Is that right? So what was growing up like in terms of faith, and when did you said Randall started following Christ at 16? What was your story?
Yeah, so I did grow up in a home with a family that had a deep love for Christ. And so I accepted Christ into my heart at 11. And I definitely grew up in church. But when I was 11, I remember there was a message specifically out of James 2 that was talking about how even the demons know God. But how, you can know God but not have, a personal relationship with him. And that chapter goes on to talk about your faith, And so I remember the Holy Spirit just really convicting me that, I had grown up in church and knew Bible stories and knew a lot about God, but that I hadn't really surrendered my heart to him. So, from the age of 11, I've walked with the Lord, and the Lord is definitely, there's things I've had to walk through as far as like even more being probably like a Pharisee and self-righteous, being more in high school, just kind of revealing things like that in my heart as far as me feeling like I had to, please the Lord kind of with my deeds or find my worth in that. So I feel like the Lord kind of taught me that. But that's when my walk with him started. And then, he just really grew it when he gave us the girls. So,
Yeah, so I think that's interesting. One of the things that, I think this is true for everybody, but particularly for people who come to Christ at a young age, there seems to be this real distinct maturity point where your faith has to evolve and grow into a place that it is really your own. The blessing is that you grow up in a home and an environment where your spiritual life is growing, encouraged, but it says sometimes lead to this moment of crisis where you kind of go, wait a minute, is what I believe mine, or is it just my home? And then how do I take that to be my own? Do you have a point like that? 11 years old, so in any time in your teenage years where it's like I've got to kind of a moment where you realize I've got to make this my own, or did that just happen gradually, or what was your experience?
Yeah, so I think, when I was 5, I was baptized, but I really feel like at that time it was more of a just knowing all about Jesus. And like you're saying, growing up in a Christian home, that it's important, to give your heart to Christ. But I feel like more at 11 is where I really understood what that looked like, and realizing that it wasn't realizing that, you could know about God, but not know him and have a relationship with him. And so I feel like it was on Valentine's Day. So on Valentine's Day, I just really felt the Lord calling me to him. So I feel like along the way, yes, he's definitely taught me different things, but I feel like that is the point where I was aware of like, I don't have this relationship with him. It was more of a head knowledge, if that makes sense, versus knowing him in my heart.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and you mentioned that one of the big growth points in your faith has to do with your kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's how I met the Coopers.
Yeah.
I say met that in a deeper sense than just kind of knowing you in the hallways of church. So we moved here, like I said, in 2011. Are kind of getting to know people and knew who you were, obviously from being here, but not just tons and tons of depth. Until one day, get a call. So knew you were expecting your kiddos, and twins were coming.
Yes.
And so we're getting ready for that. And then I remember, so our former pastor, Pat Kelly, said, "Hey, I'm going to go to Shreveport. The twins are coming, and so we're going to go and be with Randall and Kara. Do you want to come?" It's like, okay. So here I am, and came, and that was, I just remember so vividly sitting in and meeting your family for the first time, which was cool because I didn't know you guys super well, but then got to hang out with your family and get to know just what an amazing family you have, and got to meet them. But that's where I dropped into your story, and there were lots of that in that moment. There were lots of questions. What is the future going to look like? And so maybe that's a good point. For you to kind of, okay, what's going on at that point? That's where I drop into your story. You're about to have twins. There's some complications and questions around that. What all's going on there?
Yeah. So, you dropped in on July 3rd, the day that the girls came, and, we were expecting twins, and these were our first babies. So I just assumed that I would carry them like almost a full term. So the girls weren't due until September 5th. But so we had spent 3 days in the hospital. My labor had started, and they had put me on some medication and were able to stop my labor. But once they took me off the medication, my labor started back. So, but the Lord knew, So on July 3rd at 1:23, Kate Cooper was born, and then at 1:24, Hannah Cooper was born. And it was an amazing day that they surprised us by showing up so early.
So early. Yeah. And so from the very, very beginning, there were, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I miss details. And maybe this is a good part to even say, you have recorded so much of this story, and originally it was recorded in emails. You were sending emails out for people to pray. Yeah. And there's something else going on in those emails too. And I've gone back and read them, actually. I read them all this morning. And it wasn't just you asking people to pray, but it was also you very intentionally telling people about how good God is.
Yeah,
and that is one of the things that just really stands out as I've reread those emails, is the testimony element of it, that you had a deep conviction to tell people, like, look at how good God is in this story. So much of this is recorded. So before we even just get into the details of the story, at what point did you realize and start really? Because these goes, I don't know if I have all of them, but I have emails that go back to October of 2012. So really early on, what made you just go, I'm gonna write all this down and send this out? How did that happen?
Yeah, well, I think, when we were in the NICU, like, we were told so many things, like, this is the way it's going to be. And so Randall, is it okay for me to go back this way? Like,
go.
It's protecting.
Yeah, go.
Okay, so our girls were born that day, and we thought everything, I mean, we were still like processing like, whoa, our babies are here, And when you have preemie babies, like you don't get to see them, you don't get to touch them. Like they're just in a little isolate thing. And I remember I woke up, they had to put me to sleep right when the girls were born because the medicine was not working like it should be, and I could feel with the C-section, I could feel a lot of pain. And so once the babies were out, they knocked me out. But when I woke up from there, I had to walk, which you can't do right after you have a C-section. But anyway, all that to say, Randall and I were processing like, whoa, our babies are here. Like everything, was totally different yesterday, and the babies are here and we couldn't hold them. We couldn't, you could put your hand through this like little circle and you could kind of touch them. But anyway, so we were kind of in shock, I think, at least for the first couple of days. I know I was. And just trying to like wrap my mind around like, whoa, okay, the babies are here. Like all the things you normally, like you couldn't even change their diaper, like nothing, And so anyway, but I remember like trying to process what had happened. And I remember it was July 4th because we were in Shreveport and we can see these fireworks going out over the river. And I remember like just being, I don't know, just trying to process it and just reading scripture, trying to kind of find comfort. And because this was so not my plan to have these babies. But I remember the Lord took me to scripture in Ecclesiastes chapter 11. And it said, just as you cannot understand how the wind blows, or how a baby grows in its mother womb. So you can't, you're not always going to understand the Lord's ways. And so I remember getting that scripture and thinking like, okay, Lord, like you knew that they were coming today, And so anyway, but it was the very next day where our world just kind of shattered for a little bit as far as we were told that the girls, because they were born at 30 weeks, they always did a CT scan on all those babies. And so we knew that was happening and didn't think anything about it because they told us it was routine. But during that CT scan is when they discovered that Kate had had a global stroke at some point in utero. And once we found that news and just trying to process, the doctors left us with no hope that she would come home from the hospital with us. And so Randall and I just kind of, how like, just in trying to process that, but then in also knowing like, okay, I don't understand, but sometimes the Lord heals by letting us go home to heaven. And so I remember like us praying and like really wrestling through, but knowing, okay, maybe the doctors are right. Like maybe she's not going to make it home. But, the Lord just had other plans. And so I think, as far as in sharing in October, like in so many ways, we saw like the doctors would say like, we have no idea like why she's still able to be here with you and not just here, but like thriving. Like she's doing so many things that we can't explain. And so we would say, well, let me tell you, it's Jesus, So it would have been wrong to have kept it all to ourselves. So
wow. So that is a dramatic shift to go from the euphoric, we've just had these children, especially when that's a new experience for parents. It's just like, what does it feel like? What is that like? And then to go into that moment with there being distance.
Yes.
And then with that distance to have to process, I'm sure, a massive amount of information. I mean, I'm sure as this is coming, this is tons of overwhelming just medical information and prognosis and all that, coupled with the distance that because they were in the NICU. So at what point in that, I mean, so they were there, how long were they there?
They were there 7 weeks.
Okay. So in that 7 weeks, and you share this in your stories, but at some point it's like, it becomes clear that everything that everybody's saying is wrong.
Yeah.
Did you have a sense of that shift early on? Did that take, what happened that made you kind of even maybe for the first time go, I'm not sure these experts are quite as expert as, and no, criticism. They're giving you what the numbers and the, you know, I'm sure, and the research shows, but you're seeing a whole different reality take place. When did you start to key into that and go, something extraordinary is happening here?
Yeah. So, I really wrestled with the Lord. It wasn't just like, okay, Lord, you know, whatever you want to do.
Right.
I can remember like being over her isolate and just like praying, you know. But I think for me, when they told me that she would never be able to breathe on her own or come home, and the Lord just was gracious and touched her body and let her breathe. And so when being open, I feel like the Lord, one of the things he spoke to my heart was that I was going to have to be really open-handed with Kate. And so I felt like if he chose to heal her by taking her home to heaven, then I was just going to have to trust him with her in that. But at the same time, when she started doing things that the doctors were saying, like, she'll never do, but she was doing it, then I just felt in my heart like, you know, I mean, God can do anything, right? And so he just really impressed in my heart to believe that he could do anything, because I didn't want my lack of faith to hinder what he could do for her and for us. But in the very next breath, I prayed he would give me strength if he didn't heal her the way that I wanted him to. And so anyway, he was really good in that. He used the scripture, Luke 1:37, like nothing is impossible for God, you know? And so, he used that verse, and I kind of claimed it. And God was so gracious. Kate's neurologist was a Christian. And he would tell me when I would meet with a specialist, sometimes it felt like you were being beat up because they wouldn't recognize lots of times anything that she was doing, even though it was very, very small. They were quick to tell me like, but she won't do this, this, and this. And it's like, okay, you know, but he would tell me, Kara, they're looking at Kate like she's a textbook case, and she's not a textbook case. And he would tell me she is in God's hands, and only God knows what life will look like for this little girl.
Wow.
And so how amazing that her brain doctor, you know, would speak that over her.
You're saying that was really early on in the...
Yes, that was really early on. So we met Dr. Pena the day after her neurologist.
This is Dr. Pena,
yes.
He plays a big role in this story. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. So we met him the day after we were given the diagnosis of the CT scan. And he even told me, like, I'm so sorry, you know, she's not going to make it. And so he was very kind. I know he probably repeated himself 1,000 times just trying to process. But we saw him at that appointment, and then we left, and in October we were supposed to do a follow-up appointment. Well, we had gone the week before to see a neurosurgeon, and I was so excited because this doctor had told me she'd never breathe on her own, you know, she'd never do all these things. And Kate was doing those things, and but anyway, it was just a very negative appointment. So I left there, and we were supposed to see Dr. Pena the next week. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to be excited this time because, you know, he's just going to tell me all the things again.
You're preparing yourself for getting beat up again.
Yeah, being beat up. And everything was still so raw, right? Like we had just found out in July. But anyway, I went in, and he said, this baby is a miracle. And he said to his nurse, you should touch her. She's a miracle. And he looked at me and said, I knew she would make it. And I said, no, like, I think you're thinking of someone else. Like, you told me that she wasn't going to make it. And he said, well, I had to tell you that because that's what all the medical signs were pointing at. But he said when he went to evaluate her for the first time, when he opened the isolate, she turned and she looked at him. And he said, he'd never had that happen before, and he just felt the Lord say to him to trust him. So,
wow.
Yeah, that's amazing. Dr. Pena was such a blessing to our family, and I know the Lord is the one that picked him to be Kate's neurologist.
Wow.
I'm so thankful.
Well, there's so many different themes there. I mean, let's talk a little bit about, because one of the things I want to get to is just the idea of provision. And you guys saw that in this story over and over and over again, as it related to people, as it related to things that you needed. resources, all sorts of stuff. There was provision, but the thing that just stands out is if you just read through this story, the thing that stands out very early on is that Kate just defies every odd that there is. I mean, from very early on, and you went through different phases of people saying things that she wasn't going to be able to do. And I believe one of the, obviously breath was the first one.
Yeah.
And it's like, and that got defied quickly.
Yes.
And then, but then wasn't one of the first real hurdles, her being able to keep food down? And that was that was a big deal. And people said, "Oh, she's not going to be able to do that." What was that process like?
Yeah, so it was really hard. I did not know, and during those days, like there just wasn't a lot of sleep at our house, so there wasn't a lot of time to like kind of clear-headedly think and look at things. But what we didn't know until Kate was almost 3 months old was that she had reflux really bad.
Yeah,
and so it was very, very, very challenging to know how much to feed her and just be content with the food you got in her, or do you just push it and feed her some more and chance that she may spit up, you know? So we were able to get in and see a specialist super quick, which was a huge blessing. I think that was definitely a big thing. And then at some point, I think when Kate was 15 months old, we had a G button put in, which made our life so much easier for her and for us because we were able to remove the air from her stomach.
Yeah.
That was definitely a big hurdle. But, Kate, I mean, being a parent, God always uses your children, to teach you lots of different things. But I think with Kate in particularly, things like feeding a child that you normally, you can pretty much handle that or whatever. I mean, there was so much I knew that I wasn't in control of. And so even in those really, really hard times, I knew he was with me, so he was so gracious to do that. But yeah, he definitely did provide the right doctor and then a doctor that could explain exactly why we need to do this. Because, one of the things they had told me is that she would never eat, and she was eating. And so being able to know, like, no, this is the right thing to do for her. It's not giving up on that, as her mom trying to fight and far. So, yeah.
One of the things you describe as you talk about the challenge of her eating and throwing things back up, and is the conversations between you and Randall.
Oh, yeah.
And you guys are talking about, well, do we feed her more? Do we not? What do you want to do? How do we, and I imagine, just as any parent would, you come to these moments where you don't know what to do, where whatever's happening in front of you, you're like, there's no textbook for this.
That's a lot of what parenting is.
That's right. That's a lot of what parenting is. So talk a little bit about it, especially in those early days, where so much is unknown, but yet you see just miracle after miracle starting to take place. Talk a little bit about, if you can, what's going on in the dynamic between you and Randall, and what those conversations are, and how, because I've heard you guys just talk about how God really strengthened the two of you together, and you held one another up. And what's that like as you're experiencing that kind of in the moment? Are you aware of it, that we're holding each other up here, or is that something that you see as you look back? What are those moments like in a marriage?
Yeah. So in those early days, for probably the first 11 months of their life, they had to eat every 3 hours. The girls did. So they had to eat every 3 hours. So by the time we fed both of them, changed both of them, you had like 45 minutes before it was time to do it again. So yeah, it was like, how fast can I eat a sandwich and what else can I do in 45 minutes? But so Randall at that time was working 4 10-hour days. So Monday through Thursday, he wasn't coming home until after 6. And we just decided he offered to cook. So for those crazy months, he cooked supper and I fed the girls at 6. And then he was awesome and fed them at 9. And I tried to go to sleep before midnight. So yeah, we are very much opposites. But man, God used that to make us a team. I can remember early on people telling us, like, having a baby that has special needs, like, that's going to be really hard on your marriage. Like, do you know how many couples don't make it? I mean, it's just, And so I can remember us going out. My parents gave us a date night once a week, and they still do. They're awesome. But they would give us a date night. And I remember, like, someone speaking that to me and just being like, whoa, like, that's scary, So I remember Randall and I talking about that, and he was like, that's not going to happen to us, and not because we're special, but just because we were going to press in together. And so, yeah, we definitely process things differently, but we're able to walk through it hand in hand and kind of figure out what that looked like. So, yeah, but that was all, that was just God being so gracious and all the people that were praying for us.
Yeah,
So,
man. And the recognition of how the Lord uniquely even put you together and wired you, that he would even provide those personality things and different strengths and weaknesses to be able to walk through something like that. That provision, even in personality, is amazing. To see. So maybe I've skipped over something massive. So you gotta catch me if I miss. Like, we went from this a tough prognosis, not gonna be able to breathe on our own, to at home.
Yeah.
So sorry about. So at some point we leave the hospital. Like, hello, like, major first thing, and I missed it. But so what was the transition from hospital to home? Like, are you like walking out the door with the girls, like, see you later, you people that said we're not going home, like, what's that like?
So I was able to stay with the girls all during our stay. I stayed across the street in a home that they had there for families that had someone in the hospital, which was such a blessing. And then Randall was there from Thursday night till Sunday night when he had to go back. But yeah, it was amazing. So the last night that we were there, they actually let us take the girls into a room, and all four of us get to stay in a room together. And
how long had it been before you got to do that? I mean, what day was that?
It was like day 49.
Oh my gosh.
And so I had people say, like, weren't you scared? And I was like, no, I was so ready to get my babies and go. But no, it was amazing. The thing I remember the most is when they finally unplugged all the cords, because when we carry them, you had to make sure, like, the cords didn't get wrapped around a chair and things would beep. And so, when they finally unplugged all their cords, and we were like, we're out of here. Randall's like, we got to get back to Texas. So, anyway, but that was I believe August 20th. So we've been there from July 3rd to August 20th. So,
well, I mean, I think one of the things that happens, that's so long. That's just such a.
I mean, I'm just thinking about if we had our kids and we were in the hospital for like 2 nights. We're like, this is forever. That's nothing compared to that.
Well, but then there's that moment, and again, like, parents, just there's that moment where you get home with them for the first time. And there's for sure the relief of, like, being out of the hospital and the system and all that kind of stuff. But then there's also, at least for me, there's that moment of, like, oh gosh, it's just us. The help is gone. Like, what do we, I don't know how to do this. I don't know. Did you have that kind of that moment, or were you so relieved to be out that you kind of bypassed that?
Yeah, I was so thankful to bring both babies home, and then to have Randall home too was like, I mean, for us to all be together. I think maybe that was just the Lord just taking care of me not to be scared.
Yeah.
But I was just so thankful to have us all together. So
Yeah.
Right.
So, okay. So then begins this, I say begins, the continuation of this journey of defying every odd and kind of overcoming the things that we were told that you were told that wouldn't happen, and so one of those first things is it speech more? Is it more or like recognition of you? What was kind of the next big hurdle after you got home? What was the next thing? It was like, she won't be able to do this.
Yeah.
but that we were going, no, I think maybe so. What was that?
Yeah, so definitely the feeding thing was a long process, and trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
And then after that, I think the first big thing was they had told us, she would not recognize us. Once they found out that Kate was going to breathe on her own, we were told, well, she won't be able to do anything but open and close her eyes. And so Dr. Pena had told us because the stroke was so massive, it would take her body a little while to recoup, and we just have to see, how she did. But I believe it was in March when she first smiled at us, and it was the most amazing thing. And it was like, look, and it was like a crooked little halfway smile. But when we would start to talk to her and she would smile, and it was like, okay, like this was not supposed to happen. And I think with Kate, every little thing was so sweet because we knew it was a gift, from the Lord. But that was definitely one of the biggest things. A little bit after that, we went to some really good friends' house that we had grown up with. And at that time, they lived in Nacogdoches, the Martins. And I had left the girls inside with my friend Amanda and her little girl. And I had gone out to tell Randall something. And while I was gone, my friend said she was blowing like kisses. She was like blowing a kiss and like listening. And Amanda told her, Kate, your mom went outside. She'll be right back. And she stopped. And so that's what we started noticing. She was able to move her lips. So I woke up one morning and I for years, I slept with the baby monitor on my side of the bed, but I woke up and she was blowing kisses. And when I would go in and talk to her, she would stop and she would smile at me. So kisses were like a huge way. And I mean, what a sweet gift from the Lord, for her to be able to show affection back to us. But yeah, blowing kisses was a big thing. With time, we started hearing her say, make letter sounds like with her lips. So Ilm is one of those sounds, so she would make the ma. And then over time, it was really sweet. She got to where she could say mama. So and just to kind of clarify, like that whole side of her brain that has language was gone, like completely gone. So, but she, over the time that we had her, she had 12 words and they were all like, she could say Hannah, she could say Papa, that was probably her favorite word. And, Bue is what she called my mom for Buela. But anyway, yeah, she had different words that, she could speak. So that was one of the big ones, just to know, like, to not know what life was going to look like for her, but to be reminded, like, only the Lord would determine what that looked like, So,
wow.
Anyway.
So in every one of these hurdles or these challenges, these things where people say, the experts say she's not going to do it, you're at home experiencing a very different reality.
Yeah.
But it doesn't come without obviously tremendous challenge. And I think that's one of the things that really comes through as you read your story, read through these emails, is that you don't hide the difficulty. So in those moments of difficulty, I mean, just even talking about feeding every 3 hours, I mean, just that schedule, man, just wears your body. You're made for sleep, and you don't get it for a long time.
Months, yeah.
What is your mindset as you're, I'm sure, at moments physically exhausted, emotionally exhausted? I mean, there's a lot of ups and downs in that. What's your mindset? What's your perspective? What is it that kind of keeps you in such a state of belief that God is at work here in the middle of the really harder stuff?
Yeah, well, I think it was probably two things for me. So when I was pregnant with Kate and Hannah, weeks before I had them, I remember praying one evening specifically, like sitting in our living room floor and praying that more than anything, that God would be glorified in Kate and Hannah's life. And I remember the Holy Spirit saying, like, do you really mean that?
Wow.
And I remember pausing and being like, yeah, I really mean that. Like, more than anything, I want them to bring you glory. And so on those really hard days when I didn't know what I was doing, or if I was doing everything right, or understanding, like, why does it have to be hard for her to eat? The Lord would take me back to that moment where I prayed and remind me that more than anything, I wanted her life to bring him glory. And he was able to remind me she was doing that,
Wow.
Yeah.
And so that was one thing. And then the other thing that I think I just really clung to was the Lord. When we found out about Kate's diagnosis, I felt the Holy Spirit tell me I had two choices. I could either choose to trust him and be open-handed with Kate, and he could bring eternal glory from it, or I could become bitter. And I couldn't imagine having to walk through all of that for nothing, and just, I think too, him giving us Hannah and Kate, I could have hid my bitterness from Kate, but I couldn't with Hannah, So, I think those were the two things I knew I didn't want to be bitter. So, it was like, okay, if you can bring eternal good from this, like, let's go, So
you recognize, and gosh, there's so many things I want to ask you about. You just, the way you talk about your relationship with the Lord is a very conversational relationship. And I just like, I want to dive in.
Yeah.
But you were aware from the moment that this prognosis comes in that I've got a choice here. That was a very clear fork in the road for you.
Yes.
Was I'm going to either choose joy to turn it over to the Lord and to walk in obedience, or I'm going to be bitter. And you knew that from the very beginning?
Yes,
Wow.
I knew that from the beginning. I mean, and it wasn't like I was going to, nowhere through this did I have to muster up the strength or anything. I just had to trust him. So I knew from the beginning, if I did not choose to trust him, then he could still bring good from it, but it might not be as much good, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And and all that hardness and all, if he could bring any good from it, like, that's what I wanted, was him to bring good from it. But I feel like during that time, God was just really gracious to me, and he knew, like, I'm not a strong person. I'm not even a pull your boots up kind of girl. Like, that's not me, So all of the peace and the strength, like, that was all just him, helping me. And I knew I couldn't do it on my own. And so, he just was really gracious to me. So.
Well, and I think people hear stories like this, and I know I've obviously, knowing you guys well, I've on more than one occasion thought, what would I have been like going through that? I don't think I could do it. I don't think, what would I be bitter? You ask yourself, you hear stories of what things people walk through, and you think to yourself, at least I do, maybe I'm by myself in this, you think, I don't know if I could do that. But what I hear you saying is, yeah, you're probably right. You can't do that. That's the whole point. Right. And what you discovered is, and you probably wouldn't have said, if someone would have told you, hey, here's what you're going to walk through, you would have probably said, I can't, there's no way. Yes. I can't do that. But what you're saying is, you weren't prepared. You don't know how to go through it before. You discover the provision that God brings and the supply of strength and patience and what you need. You discover that along the way as you just choose to trust him. So the one thing you're doing, at least I hear you say this, and clarify if I'm wrong, but I hear you saying the one thing I felt like I was responsible for was just trusting.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. Just trusting him. Yeah.
Yeah. And in that trusting is where you're discovering the provision.
Yes, discovering the provision. And I also discovered freedom, if that makes sense. So as we're going to these different specialists and looking into, we were doing therapy from once she came home from the hospital, but it can be daunting to try. More than anything, you want your child to be able to walk and do all the things that a typical child can do. I feel like when Kate was 6 months old and we were doing the Christmas story in here at Fredonia Hill, and I remember that verse, like I said, Luke 1:37, like, nothing is possible for God. I remember it like echoing in my heart. And in that moment, I remember the Holy Spirit being like, do you really believe that? And I thinking like, yeah, I really believe you can do anything. But I feel like in that moment too, it freed me from feeling like I had to fly Kate to the specialist, in Pennsylvania or fly Kate to the specialist in California. Like the Lord, I knew that I was to be a good steward of doing therapy, and we definitely did therapy a lot. But I knew that wasn't going to determine on its own what life looked like for Kate. And so the Lord freed me to just enjoy her, as well as do therapy, definitely. And we did a lot of that in our home and drove for therapy, but it wasn't all consuming, which I think it really could have been. And it could have been, anyway, it could have been something, but the Lord just prevented it from that. So,
that's a profound point. You kind of, the freedom is in like, if this life is the Lord's,
yes,
and I believe that it is, and He's created her for His glory,
yes,
then He's going to provide for her.
That's right.
And it does free you. That's massive, because I think a lot of times in that scenario, particularly as it has to do with kids, like we can take on, I think, too much ownership a little sometimes as parents, that, this is my job to fix it.
Right.
And the pressure and the responsibility that would take at that perspective, as opposed to, no, I'm a steward of what is God's. And the freedom that brings. Were you aware of that, or was that a reflection sort of understanding? Because that's powerful.
Yeah, it is powerful. And I feel like the Lord just kind of freed me in that. I do feel like He showed me that early on, even in little ways, like, I just, in having, then we had Emily, so we have all three of them and they're little, I just felt like, yes, the Lord, it was just something that He showed to me, and wanting things to be balanced, because Kate, more than anything, would love to sit in somebody's lap versus, doing therapy or us going and doing things as a family, and, Hannah having those memories and Emily being able to look at those pictures. So I think in the moment, the Lord showed me like I didn't have to carry that, And I think one of the biggest things outside of trusting Him was I learned just to kind of rest in His sovereignty. And like when He asked me to do something, then I needed to do my part. But I knew I couldn't control things for her. And so, He just kind of freed me from that. So... And I'm so thankful He did, because I was able to enjoy her the way I did.
That's amazing. And one of the things I think that also happens, it comes across in your story, and we're going to get to this. We're going to take a quick break and reset a bit. But just the way that the Lord even worked to bring all three girls together, and the uniqueness and special nature of their relationship, I think had a lot to do with the rhythm of life that you guys decided that you were going to have, that you were going to trust Kate to the Lord and be free from the panic of control. But doing that also allowed them to have a really unique and special relationship. So I want to get into that, and there's a ton more miracles to talk about. We've got all sorts of doctors that show up, and random people that are in your path, and random thrift store finds that are like
we're gonna
essential medical equipment that shows up in a thrift store. We're going to talk about that. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back with Kara Cooper.
All right, guys, we've decided to go ahead and pause right there with Kara, and we have a lot more to come, but we're going to wait till next week to do that. So hang on, wait 7 days, and we'll continue this interview next week. Hey, if you're a friend of the pod, we want to hear from you, so you can email us at stc@fredoniahill.org. We get so many kind and encouraging comments, and we really do appreciate it. Guys, thanks for listening, and tune in next week. Adios.